Sorry, I need a drink. Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, thank you very much for the invitation. It's very nice to be here, and a big honor to address the keynote here at the conference. It's on a topic that is really close to my heart, which is about regional development traps. You might have heard about, well, I'm sure you have heard about the notion of traps. There's poverty traps, there are middle income traps, and quite recently this notion of traps have been applied to the subnational scale, and there have been some interesting work on that quite recently. And that was one of the reasons, main motivation why we thought we would also like to work on this particular topic, but more from an evolutionary perspective, and I will say something on that. This is a joint project that I did with Pierre-Alex Ballan, a good colleague and friend of mine. Actually, it was an assignment by DG Regio, which we worked on last year. We're still trying to publish it in a scientific journal, but of course reviewers take a lot of time nowadays, so we haven't heard from them yet. We are quite enthusiastic about the things, how they work in terms of measuring regional development traps and to what extent they might have an economic impact on regions. So first a bit about the notion of traps. What are traps, right? So as I said, maybe the most well-known notion of trap is the middle income trap, right, which concerns countries, emerging countries that developed rapidly but are able to grow at some point of time. And there might be a number of reasons for that. First of all, because of rising labor cost and land cost, they might be unable to compete with low-income countries in more labor-intensive and more mature industries. But they're also trapped in the sense that they lack still strong capabilities to compete with high-income countries in more knowledge-intensive industries. So kind of they're stuck in the middle, and they have a hard time to get out of that trap. So that is a kind of well-established literature. There are many empirical papers, but almost all of them are at the national scale. So we were thinking about trying to see to what extent that also makes sense to apply that to the regional scale, to the regional level. So one influential paper is a paper done by Simone Yamarino and Andres Rodriguez Posi and others that actually developed the notion of regional development trap. And they defined it in terms of economic output indicators. So a region is being trapped when it shows a persistent low economic growth. And they made a combined indicator by looking at gross regional product per capita, employment and productivity. So they made a combined indicator, and then they were measuring that for all European regions, and that's how they defined regions with a very low persistent economic growth rate over time. This paper has been quite influential also in Brussels, has been part of thinking about the future of future cohesion policy. But it is an economic output indicator. So we thought, okay, maybe we have to go a bit beyond that, because we also want to know when a region is trapped, whether that has any economic consequences. But when you already define your trap concept, building and incorporating economic output, you cannot actually assess being trapped or not on economic performance. So we were thinking about doing it in a different way, and we were quite inspired by the so-called regional lock-in literature by Robert Hassink, by Gerhard Graber and others that already some time ago developed this notion of regional lock-in. Actually, it goes back to Brian Arthur, right, on the increasing returns and path dependencies. And basically, in the economic geography literature, at least, this regional lock-in concept was applied to the lack of adaptability of old industrial regions, right? So they might get locked in a cognitive way, or in a political way, or in an economic way, and that makes that it's really hard to move out of this trap, and therefore they have a very low adaptability, a very low capacity to move into new economic activities. So we try to, we were quite inspired by that literature and thinking about, okay, how can we define regional development traps? So one of the observations that we made in previous papers is that cities or regions have capabilities that might enhance but can also constrain their capacity to diversify into more complex activities, and I will come back to that. So there are actually two notions that we take on board when defining our regional development trap. First of all is the principle of relatedness, which refers to what extent do you have relevant capabilities to move into something new, to diversify into a new economic activity. For example, if you want to go AI, as a region, do you have the relevant capabilities to move into AI? If not, then the cost will be very high to diversify into AI, and therefore maybe it might be wise not to go into that. The second notion that we used comes from economic complexity literature introduced by Cesar Hidalgo and Ricardo Hausmann at Harvard and MIT, and really refers to the fact, well, you can try to develop new economic activities, but you would prefer to develop the most complex ones, because the most complex one would mean that you don't have much competition and you might get high economic returns. So we built on those two types of notions because when doing research in some papers that we published already in the past, we can actually see, and I will come back to how it has been measured, but just to give you an idea how this really works, so you have relatedness on the x-axis and complexity on the y-axis, and each dot stands for an industry. And this is the example of Île-de-France, the Paris region. So each node stands for an industry. For example, there on the top you see computer programming, consultancy, and related activities. And here we could distinguish between about, I think it was about 60 or 80 different types of industries. And actually what you can see is that there is a positive relationship between relatedness and complexity. So in a way, Île-de-France has most relevant capabilities in the most complex industries. So it has really good diversification opportunities to move into the most complex one that will bring the highest economic returns. No wonder that Île-de-France region, the Paris region, is one of the richest and highest income regions in Europe, because it has many opportunities to move into the most complex activities that will bring highest economic returns. A relative comparative advantage, yes, sorry, okay. I have only 20 minutes. So actually what you can see is that the relatedness, okay, I go into your question. So the bigger the node, the more Île-de-France is specialized in this particular industry, right? And here we use employment data, right? So actually what you can see is that the relatedness argument really works well, because the more you go to the right, the bigger the nodes become. And this is what you would expect, right? Because the more relevant capabilities are present for that particular industry, the more specialized that region is in that particular industry. So in that sense, it really works well. But here we have Silesia region, an old industrial region, coal mining region, steel regions in Poland. And this is a different story, because Silesia has a different history, has accumulated different capabilities over time, which again provide opportunities, but also set limits to what you can achieve in this diversification process. Here you see a negative relationship between relatedness, density, and complexity, meaning, yes, Silesia has some opportunities to diversify into some industries, but those are the least complex activities. So it will not bring too many high returns, economic returns, because they have to compete with many other regions in those particular industries. Extremadura region, peripheral region in Spain. Actually, the relatedness density score, maximum value is 100. So you can actually see here, well, first of all, that Extremadura has hardly any specializations. But also, it has very little opportunities to diversify into any industry because they have very little relevant capabilities to do so. No matter whether it's a high complex or a low complex activity. That's why Extremadura region is one of the poorest regions in Europe, and therefore the future does not really look that bright because it does not really have opportunity to diversify into anything, let alone into more complex activities. So we were using this type of empirical observations to see, can we really build, can we use this type of input to build a regional development trap concept? So what we're actually doing is, there might be some regions that have little diversification opportunities in most complex activities. So you might be trapped in a low complex economy like the Silesia region, you remember. So very little opportunities in the most complex activities. It does not really have those opportunities. So it might be trapped in a low complex economy. But also the example of Extremadura, some regions might have none opportunities to diversify, let alone a low or high complex activity. So they might be trapped in a what might be referred to as a low innovation economy. Okay, this is the input that we used in order to develop this regional development trap concept. And we used 2 indicators for that, and we have a 2x2 matrix. On the x-axis, we have the average relatedness density, so it is referring to what extent do you have relevant capabilities in any industry, and you sum that up for all the industries that are part of your data set. So you have a low average relatedness density or a high average relatedness density. A low average relatedness density would mean that you have very little opportunities to diversify into anything. At the Extremadura case, well, the average relatedness density, when it is very high, you have many opportunities in many different industries to develop those further. And then on the y-axis, you have the average complexity. That is the current economic structure of the region. Are you specialized in low complex activities or in high complex activities on average? And so you get then a 2x2 matrix. And then what is also nice about that is that you get a typology of different types of regional development traps. So we go beyond the question, are you trapped or not in a middle income trap, or are you trapped in a regional development trap? No, we can have a typology of different types of traps that we can. So here we have our low complexity trap. So you have opportunities to diversify, but only in low complex activities. There we call low relatedness trap. That is a very interesting one because you have little opportunities to diversify while the region still has some high complex activities. This might be due to the fact that, due to investments of multinational corporations that have remained cathedrals in that particular region, so there are very little spillovers to the local economy. So you still have a high complex economy, but you have very little opportunities to diversify into anything. And that's an interesting trap situation. And then, of course, you have the structural trap, the Extremadura regions, right? Little opportunities, and you have a low complex economy, and you're kind of stuck into that. So you have 3 types of traps. Of course, the complexity loop, you're fine, right? So you have many opportunities in the most complex activities. This is the Ile-de-France region, right? That is in a complexity loop. So they don't have to worry too much about their future. Okay, This is the concept, this is a bit of the theory behind it, now the data. So we did that for all European regions. We used employment data by industry, by region, which we derived from Eurostat. We used the structural business statistics. Well, there are a lot of problems with the structural business statistics. I don't know if you have any experience in working with this type of data. First of all, it's not comprehensive. So it only covers about 54% of all economic activities in our economy. So we really had to work hard to get that right. So we merged that data set with the Ardeco data set in order to get a more comprehensive data set, although those data are much more aggregated. Well, I don't go into any technical details. But in the end, after we're having done a lot of work on that, we developed a data set in which we could distinguish between 33 sectors at the 2-digit NACE code covering a long period. We had data on 240 NUTS2 regions in all EU 27 countries. About measuring relatedness density, we followed the kind of simple procedure in which we first had to define the degree of relatedness between each pair of industries, which was done. We followed the science paper by Hidalgo et al., published in 2007, in which each pair of region is measured in terms of the degree of relatedness based on co-occurrence of analysis. So basically what they do is very simple. When two industries pop up in combination at the country level or at the regional scale, that might not be a coincidence, but they might share similar capabilities, and that's why you often find them in combination at that spatial scale. And we use that information, then we regionalize it, and we use the relatedness density measure, which will get a maximum value if you have relevant capabilities to develop one particular industry. So if you have all of those relevant capabilities that you need to move into that industry, so you have a maximum value of 1. If you have no relevant capabilities whatsoever to move into, for example, AI, you have a minimum value of 0. And therefore, and what you would expect, of course, the higher the relatedness density, the more you will be able to exploit the capabilities to move into a new economic activity that you would like to promote. And then you take the average relatedness density to all industries for a given region. So actually, it's a measure of to what extent you have a potential to move into many new industries over time. Complexity can have a long, and there's always a long debate about how to measure economic complexity. There's not really a kind of agreement in the literature, but we just did it in a very simple way because we wanted to build a measure of how complex an industry actually is. And we want to compare each industry with any other industry. So industries are considered complex, according to Hidalgo and Hausman, when being unique. So actually, what it is saying is that if you have many countries in the world or many regions in Europe, and in which and if some countries or some regions are able to specialize in a particular activity, but not many other countries and not many regions, that might give a first indication that this activity might be very complex to develop. That there are only very few countries or regions actually capable of doing that. So it calculates how many regions produce the activities in which they have a comparative advantage. But more importantly, a complex activity is a complex industry is an industry that is able to combine many different types of capabilities. So AI, for example, is a very complex technology because it does not really rely on one particular knowledge piece, but it has to bring many different capabilities together, and that's why it makes it so complex. And you take that into account. And then you measure an average economic complexity of all industries in which a region has a comparative advantage. So how is your economy, does it consist of high complex industries or low complex industries? Now you can have a nice long discussion about those rankings of those industries. As I said, we distinguish between 33 industries. And guess what? What is our most complex industry? The motion picture industry. Everybody would immediately think, well, that must be, for sure, those high-tech industries will rank very high because they are the most complex one. No, motion industry is the most complex one. Why? Because when producing a film, you really have to bring a lot of different types of expertise together in order to produce a film. And therefore, it's a super complex activity. And so we took that on board. Computer programming scores very high. The least complex industries that we measured was mining and quarrying, agricultural activity, basic manufacturing, right? So in a way, it makes sense. It's kind of intuitive, although you can always have discussions about some of the industries in these complexity rankings. But I think it works really well. These are the regions that are being trapped in Europe. So, of course, except for the ones that are in a complexity loop, right? So my Spanish colleague here, so you will see for Spain it really works pretty well, right? Basque Country, here, in a complexity loop, not being trapped. Catalonia, Madrid. So those are the regions that really excel there in a complexity loop, right? So they have many opportunities to move into the most complex activities. So they will do well, so we expect them to do well, so they're not being trapped. Of course, look at France, for example. Only Ile-de-France region, the Paris region, as expected, is in a complexity loop. All capital regions in Europe are in a complexity loop. There's almost no exception. I just saw that in Hungary, we missed the data on Budapest, but I'm sure that Budapest would really score high on economic, because Budapest is a notorious region because they change borders all the time. So for statisticians, it's not really nice, so we left them out. The same for Warsaw region, by the way. But all the capital regions are not being trapped. And, well, some other regions are not being trapped as well. A lot of them in the Netherlands, in Germany, northern Italy, etc. Now, let's first go to the structural trap, right? You remember low relatedness and low complexity. So the Extremadura regions, those are the ones that are colored red. Well, many of them are in Eastern Europe. Many of them are in Portugal, south of Italy, Greece, Bulgaria, a number of regions in Ireland. So they're stuck and they're associated with this structural trap. Low average relatedness density, low complexity. Now what's interesting is those low relatedness trap, right? You remember those regions that have high economic complexity, but have no opportunities to diversify into anything because the high complex activities, they are disconnected from any other activity in the region. They are just kind of cathedrals in the desert as we used to refer to those. So the capabilities that those high complex activities represent cannot be used in order to diversify into anything new. And this is true for the whole of France, except of Ile-de-France. And it goes back to the discussion about France, right? All of them are all of them are transition regions nowadays, and I think this is part of the story. Okay, I have to run a bit, running a bit out of time. Yes, I see. So there are also regions low complexity trap, right? So they have opportunities to move into something new, but only in low complex activities, not in high complex activities. So they're stuck in a low complex economy. Large part of Spain, Italy, well, there are a number of regions in Eastern Europe, but also in Sweden, in Finland. Of course, you can discuss for hours on each of those regions and what's going on there, but this is the overall picture. Yeah, skip that one for... So now, being trapped means that you should be trapped for some time, otherwise it doesn't, the trap concept does not have any meaning if you're trapped in 1 year and you're not trapped in another year. Actually, with some trapped indicators, and I won't mention the sources, there is actually a lot of fluctuations in there and there. Our indicator works pretty well. Now I hope that the pointer works. Yeah, it works. So here we have the period 2011-2019, and actually, so here regions that were in a complexity loop, were they still in a complexity loop in 2019? Yes, 77%. So on the diagonal, there is so the regions that were in a structural trap in 2011 were still in a structural trap in 2019. But there are a few regions that actually kind of improved. I put them in green. Actually, there are two regions in Austria that went from a structural trap to a complexity loop. I said, how is that possible? But of course, you take the medium of relatedness density and complexity levels, and of course, when you're already close to the medium, of course, if you just move a bit, you might jump from one category to the other. So that happens. So you always have to be a bit careful and interpret those type of data. But there are a few regions, 10 regions that actually managed to get out of a trap and turned into a complexity loop. For the sake of time, I really don't have so much time to explain that, but there are also regions that went from a structural trap to a low complexity trap, so meaning that they had no diversification opportunities, but now they have some diversification opportunities, but only in low complex activities, so that is already a step forward. Many of them are East European regions. Now, does it matter of being trapped or not? Right, so does it have any economic consequences? So we looked at employment growth and wage growth because I guess policymakers are most interested in that. Will it provide many new jobs? And will it provide many good jobs in terms of high wage jobs? So we use this quadrant, just did some descriptives there. Of course, we also run some econometric analysis. In the complex, so this is average employment, this is higher average employment growth, higher than the average European average. Wage growth, employment growth, relatively lower wage growth, average lower employment growth, higher average wage growth, etc., etc. So as you actually can see that the economic complexity loop, they do quite well. 52% of the regions in the complexity loop have both a higher employment growth and a higher wage growth on average. 25% of them have a higher employment growth, but not a higher wage growth on average. But they do quite well. The structural trap, they score worse in that respect. 66% of them they have lower employment growth on average. What's also quite interesting is that those low relatedness traps, 43% of them have a lower employment and a lower wage growth on average. For low complexity trap, 45%. So those traps, being trapped or not, is really meaningful in economic terms. Of course, I could show you. These are the regression results. I'm willing to take that up in the discussions if that's fine. Just a few words. Actually, what we found in the econometric analysis is being trapped or not is really bad for economic performance in terms of employment growth and in terms of wage growth. Now, what are the implications for regional policy? Just 1 minute. Sorry about that. Well, you can go from one trap to the other. Let's first go to regions that are in a low complexity trap. So they have opportunities to diversify, but in very low complex activities. Now, well, you might say for a region like Silesia, which has high unemployment, even if they would develop more low complex activities, yes, the economic returns will not be that high because they have to compete with many other regions in those activities that they try to promote. But at least it will give jobs to those that are unemployed, that have become redundant on the labor market, and that might already be a difference. So actually we did another study in which we actually showed that many regions that are in a low complexity trap actually have very good capabilities to move into all kinds of green activities of low complexity. but they can contribute to the green transition. And that would already be something to take up. But you could also say, well, if you want to get out of this low complexity trap, you really have to improve your capabilities, right? Heavy investments in education and in your research capacity, et cetera, in order to make sure that you will get out of this low complexity trap. But it will not be easy. And you really have to adapt your policy and make massive investments in this type of activities in order to make that possible. Now, what to do with Extremadura? We all struggle with that. What to do with a region like Extremadura that is caught in a structural trap? No, little opportunities to diversify in low and in high complex activities. Now, if you really look careful in those kind of graphs that I showed before, is that even in a region like Extremadura, there are always some low-hanging fruits that you could actually exploit. And this is the job of local policymakers in order to identify those and try to promote them. So I'm not that pessimistic in that respect. But of course, you could say, well, also there you have to facilitate jumps and invest in education and research. I'm not so sure whether that will work in that type of context, but it might be something that you might want to consider. But what I think would be much more helpful for this type of regions, to try to connect to other regions and try to get access to capabilities that are missing themselves, but they could use and exploit in order to move into something new. It can be through inflow of multinational corporations, it can be inflow of migrants, et cetera, there are many ways of doing that. Now, I already said the regions in a complexity loop, I mean, they are good. They're in a very comfortable position, like Ile-de-France, right? They have many capabilities to move into the most complex one. Should we develop any policy? Because you would say, well, they can do it themselves, right? So they have so many capabilities that provide them with many opportunities. No. Of course, Ile-de-France is competing with the US, is competing with China. So they need huge investments in order to make sure that they have to overcome bottlenecks in order to confront that global competition. Because it's tough, it's hard, we know Europe is behind already in many respects in terms of the digital transition. China is moving extremely fast also in the field of artificial intelligence. So we have to do something about that. And we have to tackle those bottlenecks that might still be a problem in those type of regions, although they are in a complexity loop. Okay, thank you for your attention, and sorry for running a bit out of time.